She thought he'd be her trophy, but ended up wearing his pendant. The amphitheater's prismatic walls shimmered with otherworldly luminescence, casting shifting rainbows across the assembled crowd. In the center of the arena, Mason stood, wrists bound in thick, gleaming alloy restraints. He wore the scuffs and bruises of hard-won survival, close-cropped hair framing a weathered, powerful face, his posture radiating defiance. Above him, on tiered balconies of glass and crystal, the dignitaries of the Zephyra leaned forward, their azure and gold skin glinting beneath the shifting light. The noble's eyes, cool and curious, swept over Mason as though appraising a rare, dangerous animal. From the upper tier, General Saris emerged with deliberate, predatory grace. Her midnight blue armor clung to her form, etched with ancient runes that flickered faintly. Her white hair was pulled back, revealing sharply pointed ears dusted with snowy fur, and her luminous, deep blue skin glowed under the arena's lights. Violet eyes, flecked with starlight, narrowed in assessment as she gazed down at the human. Constellation-like scars traced her arms and neck, constellations mapped by pain and victory, speaking volumes to those who knew how to read them. Saris raised her voice, every syllable ringing clear as crystal. "This human will fly for me," she declared, letting her words settle over the crowd. A ripple of excitement passed through the Zephyra nobles. Their whispers were sharp as wind across glass: delight, skepticism, fascination. In the uppermost balcony, Fleetmaster Raylox, broad and imposing, leaned forward. His gold-striped skin bore the ragged remnants of old battles, and his sharp eyes appraised Mason with the grudging respect of one who recognized talent. "An excellent selection, General," Raylox intoned, his voice gravelly with authority. "His vessel evaded us longer than any before." Mason's gaze flicked from Saris to Raylox and back, his jaw set in stone. He met Saris's violet eyes without a flicker of fear. "I don't take orders from strangers," he said, voice steady and cold. A hush fell. Saris's lips curled into a half-smile, equal parts amusement and challenge. "That will change soon enough," she replied. She gestured, and the guards moved forward. "Prepare him for the flight trials." The crowd stirred with anticipation as Mason was marched from the arena. Down winding corridors and through shimmering force fields, they led him to the flight hangar, where the sleek, predatory form of a Vera skimmer awaited. Its hull shimmered with blues and silvers, reflecting the hangar's lights in dazzling patterns. Zephyra engineers glanced up as Mason was hustled aboard, their eyes wide with intrigue. Within the cockpit, Mason's hands were released from their restraints, but the memory of their weight lingered. He slid into the pilot's seat, fingers tracing unfamiliar controls, feeling the hum of alien technology beneath his touch. Behind him, Saris took the command seat, armor catching the light, eyes never leaving him. Before Mason could say a word, alarms shrilled, scarlet warning glyphs flashing across the canopy. From the void beyond, obsidian shapes burst into being. Rift Corsair ships, their hulls angular and menacing, weapons arrays already glowing. Saris's voice cut through the tension. "Standard formation, pilot." Mason didn't respond. Instead, he threw the skimmer into a wild roll, the engine screaming as he dove through a cloud of enemy fire. Saris gripped her seat, eyes wide with surprise. "What are you doing?" she demanded, the edge of command sharpening her words. But Mason was already weaving between asteroids, the ship moving with an unpredictable, reckless agility that defied Zephyra doctrine. He banked hard, ducking behind a fractured asteroid just as a Corsair's plasma bolt seared past. His hands danced over the controls, coaxing the vessel to its limits. The first Corsair ship swooped in close. Mason waited, then unleashed a pinpoint shot that clipped its engine, sending it spiraling into debris. The second attacker swung wide, but Mason anticipated the move, luring it into a narrow gap and blasting its thrusters with uncanny precision. Ceres, bracing herself, watched as the remaining corsairs broke formation, drawn into Mason's trap. He led them through a deadly waltz of shattered rock and fire, using the debris field as both shield and weapon. Plasma bolts flashed, ricocheting off metal and stone. Within minutes, Mason had disabled the remaining ships, their twisted hulks spinning out into the void. The silence that followed was electric. Back aboard the Zephyra flagship, the amphitheater was abuzz. Fleetmaster Rallock stood at the edge of the viewing balcony, his eyes blazing with excitement. "Remarkable," he declared, voice carrying over the crowd. "His tactics are unlike any we have witnessed." Ceres watched as Mason was escorted from the skimmer, the shackles on his wrists now seeming ceremonial, an empty gesture. His confidence radiated from him, magnetic and unyielding. The tension between them shimmered, alive with challenge and something deeper. Ceres realized in that charged moment that this human would not bend easily. The next day, Mason was marched into the Zephyra flagship's tech bay, his wrists still locked in ceremonial restraints that chafed against his skin. The air buzzed with ionized energy and the low, melodic hum of alien machinery. Workstations lined the chamber, aglow with shifting glyphs. At the far end, half submerged in a tangled nest of cables, Chief Mechanic Tyra scowled at a sparking guidance array. Tyra's copper-gold skin was streaked with grease, her hair twisted into practical braids that bristled with sensor chips. She didn't look up as Mason entered, but her tail lashed in irritation. "Human, you'll only make it worse," she grumbled, running a diagnostic probe along a flickering circuit. "Zephyra Tech is not for stumbling apes." Mason ignored the sting in her words. He watched the cluster of lights on the malfunctioning console, noting the uneven pulse. He knelt beside her, his eyes tracing the wiring with practiced care. "You're overloading the secondary bus. The regulators are fighting each other," he said quietly. Tyra glared, but Mason's hands moved with calm authority. He pinched a length of conduit, stripped the casing with his nails, and rerouted a power line, bridging two nodes with a steady hand. The console stuttered. Then the readout flashed a steady green. The whole guidance array hummed to life, the control surfaces adjusting in perfect synchronicity. Tyra blinked, caught between offense and grudging admiration. "How did you—" "Your tech's advanced, but the basics are familiar," Mason replied, straightening. His tone was matter-of-fact, respectful, but without a trace of subservience. From the doorway, Ceres observed, arms folded, curiosity flickering in her violet eyes. She'd been drawn by the surge of power, and now she watched the human's sure movements, the confidence in his hands. Mason turned as she approached, his expression unreadable. "Not bad," Ceres said, nodding at the now functioning console. Mason met her gaze, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Guess I'm good for more than flying." Tyra snorted, muttering something about lucky guesses, but her posture had shifted. Less bristling, more open. Ceres, however, had eyes only for Mason. She studied the set of his jaw, the steadiness in his stance. "Walk with me," she commanded. Mason nodded, falling into step beside her as she led him from the tech bay. The corridor outside was wide, lined with crystalline panels that pulsed with soft light. Zephyra officers passed them, glancing at Mason with thinly veiled interest, but none dared approach while Ceres was near. They entered her war room, a chamber of cool shadows and glinting surfaces. Holographic star fields hovered above crystal tables, constellations twisting and reforming with every gesture. In the center, a large projection displayed recent raids, red flares marking Rift Corsair incursions, lines of movement tracking skirmishes across half a dozen systems. Ceres gestured at the map, her armored hand slicing through a cluster of hostile signatures. "The Rift Corsairs have been harrying us for weeks," she said. "Your tactics yesterday gave us an unexpected edge." Mason stepped closer, examining the shifting lines. His eyes flicked from data node to data node, reconstructing the pattern with a pilot's intuition. "They're probing for weak spots," he said after a moment. "Testing your responses, looking for a reaction you can't cover." Classic pirate playbook. Never commit. Always faint. Saris leaned in, the projection's blue glow painting her features in shifting light. She was close enough to catch the scent of him. Metal, sweat, adrenaline, the raw energy of someone who thrived under pressure. For a heartbeat, the room shrank to the space between them. "What would you suggest?" she asked, voice low, almost intimate. Mason's gaze didn't waver. "Feign vulnerability where you're strongest. Let them think they've found a hole. Draw them in deep, then hit hard. No mercy." She studied him, the silver cuffs on his wrists gleaming in the hollow light. There was something about the way he wore the restraints, not as a sign of defeat, but almost as a badge of survival. It enhanced his presence, made him seem more dangerous, more compelling. "You speak like a leader, not a prisoner," Saris said, her words slow, probing. Mason's mouth curved, just slightly. "Maybe that's what I am." The words hung in the air, charged. Saris felt her composure fray at the edges. This human looked at her as an equal, not as a conqueror or captor. For a moment, the war room was silent, the hum of data streams fading to nothing. She straightened, reclaiming her mask of command. "The fleet launches in 1 hour. You'll be at my side for the operation. Afterward." She paused, letting the possibility linger. "We'll see what you're truly capable of." Mason nodded once, the challenge clear in his eyes. He turned and left the war room, moving with the self-assured stride of someone who'd faced worse odds and survived. As the doors slid shut behind him, Saris caught her reflection in the polished surface of the crystal table. For the first time in cycles, her expression was softer, the fierce lines of her face eased by uncertainty. The data streams flickered in her peripheral vision, but her focus was inward, on the spark that had been lit by this human's presence. He was no longer a mere captive. He was a mystery, one she was suddenly, dangerously eager to solve. Mason's grip tightened on the skimmer's controls as he guided the sleek craft through the chaos of the asteroid belt. Shards of ancient rock spun past the hull, some so close they scraped the shields, filling the cockpit with a fizz of static. Flanking them, 2 Zephyra elite escorts maintained formation, their engines burning sapphire in the darkness. In the command seat behind him, Saris watched the sensor readouts, the light of the displays reflecting in her violet eyes. But Mason's focus was all instinct and experience. His hands moved with a deliberate precision, every twitch reading the flow of debris, the subtle dance of ships through the belt. Saris caught herself watching his hands, the way they belonged at the controls, confident, quick, and unerringly sure. Without warning, Mason tensed. A flicker on the periphery, a pattern in the movement of dust clouds. His mind caught what the sensors hadn't. "Incoming. Ambush," he said, his voice low and certain. Before Saris could respond, Rift Corsair ships erupted from hiding. They glided from behind asteroids, black, predatory, their weapons already aglow. The Zephyra formation was caught off guard. To starboard, the scout ship Dawnfire took a direct hit. Its stabilizers flared, then failed, sending the vessel into a wild, helpless spin. The comms lit up with static-laced shouts. Saris reached for the tactical display, but Mason was already moving. He threw the skimmer into a hard dive, engine trails flaring as he slotted their ship between the crippled Dawnfire and the enemy. Plasma fire hammered their shields, shaking the cockpit. "You're risking our lives," Saris snapped, bracing herself as another salvo struck. "Trust me," Mason shot back. His eyes were locked on the battlefield, calm in the storm. The Zephyra escorts struggled to regroup, but Mason didn't wait. He rolled the skimmer, using its hull as a moving shield, absorbing the brunt of the Corsair's assault. Each movement was calculated. He fired in rapid bursts, disabling the nearest attacker, forcing the others to break off their approach to the dawnfire. Mason's aim was surgical. The black hulls of the Corsair ships erupted in showers of sparks as his shots found their targets. Saris worked the comms, relaying orders to the escorts. But even as she issued commands, she realized Mason was leading the fight, his actions dictating the flow of battle. He drifted the skimmer in close, side by side with the spinning dawnfire, matching its wild vector. "She's losing life support," Saris reported, her voice tight. "I see it," Mason replied. He adjusted the skimmer's shields, projecting an envelope that overlapped the dawnfire's battered hull. The Corsairs pressed the attack, but Mason kept them at bay, his maneuvers unpredictable, his timing razor-sharp. One Corsair broke ranks, trying to flank them. Mason let it close, then spun the skimmer through a gap in the asteroids, using a tumbling boulder as cover. The Corsair overshot, and Mason tagged it with a blast that sent it careening into the rocks. The escorts rallied behind his lead. Together, they laid down a barrage that forced the remaining Corsairs to scatter, the enemy ships vanishing into the shadows as quickly as they'd appeared. The battered patrol limped home, the dawnfire stabilized, and the skimmer's hull scorched but intact. The silence in the cockpit was electric. Saris glanced at Mason, her earlier anger replaced with something more complex: admiration and an unsettling sense of vulnerability. That night, Saris summoned Mason to her private chamber. The walls glowed with a gentle inner light, crystal panels casting shifting patterns on the floor. The air was still, the only sounds the distant hum of the flagship's engines. Mason entered quietly, no longer in flight gear but simple attire. A dark shirt, loose at the neck, sleeves rolled to the elbows. His arms bore the marks of old wounds, scars etched like pale lightning over bronzed skin. Saris had set aside her armor. She wore a tunic of midnight fabric, her white hair loose, falling in a shimmering sheet over one shoulder. She faced him, her bearing less formal, voice low and sincere. "The Dawnfire's crew owes you their lives." Mason shrugged, the gesture humble but unwavering. "I did what anyone should." Saris shook her head, stepping closer. "Most would have left them. You risked everything for your team." Her words carried the weight of experience, the knowledge that in war, mercy was a rare and dangerous thing. Mason's gaze met hers, quiet and steady. "A crew's only as strong as its weakest link. Leave one behind, you weaken everyone." She reached out, her fingers tracing a jagged scar along his forearm. The touch was feather-light, intimate. "These mark your battles?" she asked softly, her eyes searching his. He held her gaze, letting the silence speak for him. The tension between them changed, no longer a contest of wills, but something electric, fragile, and new. Saris's hand lingered, her thumb brushing the old wound. "You are nothing like I expected," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The confession hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. Mason's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Nor are you." Their eyes locked, and the space between them seemed to pulse with a new energy. The boundaries that had defined them, captor and captive, commander and subordinate, fell away. Saris felt the shape of her expectations dissolving, replaced by something unpredictable and alive. She stepped even closer, drawn by the quiet strength in Mason's eyes. Her breath caught as she realized just how much her world had shifted. The man before her was no longer a threat to control, but a mystery she longed to unravel. In that moment, as the crystal walls glowed around them, Saris let herself lean in, surrendering to the possibility of something neither of them had anticipated. Days later, Mason stood alone in the heart of the Zephyra fleet's data vault. The room pulsed with silent power, walls of translucent crystal, columns of streaming glyphs, and 100 data streams flickering overhead. Here, the secrets of 1,000 missions spun in delicate constellations, each thread connected to the next by invisible hands. Mason's eyes moved quickly, fingers dancing across the interface. Saris had granted him limited access, a gesture of trust, but also a test. He searched for what the Zephyra command had missed. Attack vectors, deployment times, Corsair signatures. He mapped every ambush on a holographic sphere, looking for the pattern beneath the chaos. Something nagged at him. The timing was too precise, the Corsairs always striking when Zephyra patrols were most vulnerable. He dug deeper, requesting encrypted logs, cross-referencing communications traffic. It was there, buried in routine transmissions, a repeating anomaly, a set of coded signals preceding every Corsair assault. He isolated the signature, an encrypted burst, always routed through the hands of communications specialist Varek. Mason's jaw clenched. Varek's record was spotless. He was the last person anyone would suspect. But the data was clear. The door to the vault slid open. Saris entered, her expression expectant but wary. She wore the weight of command tonight. No trace of the softness she'd shown Mason in private. Yet her eyes sought his, searching for reassurance. Mason met her gaze and brought up the projection, letting the damning evidence play out in shifting light. "I found it," he said quietly. "Every time the Corsairs strike, this transmission comes first." Saris's eyes narrowed, taking in the data. "Who is it?" He hesitated, wishing he could soften the blow. "Varek. He's leaking intel, probably for credits. Every signal leads back to his console." The silence between them was heavy. Saris's jaw worked as she stared at the name, 1,000 memories flickering in her eyes. He is a trusted officer. Mason watched her, seeing the lines of betrayal etch themselves deeper across her face. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, careful not to crowd her. "Trust is a leader's strength," he said gently. "Don't let betrayal change that. You taught me that much." Saris glanced at him, her composure threatening to crack. She drew a steadying breath and sat on the edge of the data table, the flicker of hololights making her look impossibly distant and heartbreakingly real. Mason sat beside her, close enough to feel her trembling resolve. For a long minute, neither spoke. Finally, Saris straightened her shoulders, iron reasserting itself in her spine. "We'll set a trap," she said, voice cool. "Feed him false data. Something irresistible. We watch and see who bites." Mason nodded, respect in his eyes. "We'll know within a day. If he's working with the Corsairs, they won't be able to resist." They stood. As they left the vault together, Saris hesitated at the threshold. The shielded door's light bathed them in blue. She looked at Mason, something unspoken passing between them. "Thank you, Mason," she said. No command, no rank, just her voice, quiet and genuine. He smiled, hand brushing hers as they walked. "You're worth it." Their fingers lingered, the touch electric, the gap between them shrinking as trust and something deeper began to root. The trap was set with ruthless efficiency. Mason crafted a decoy patrol route, promising a rich bounty and a vulnerable target. Saris authorized the transmission, making certain only Varek could see it. Then they waited, tension threading every heartbeat. They didn't wait long. Within hours, Corsair ships ambushed the decoy patrol, moving with a precision that could only come from insider knowledge. The Zephyra response was immediate. Varek's access logs exposed, his every move tracked and catalogued. He was arrested on the bridge, the betrayal written in every trembling line of his body. The news swept through the fleet like wildfire. Saris watched from her command post, her face set in stone, but Mason saw the flicker of pain in her eyes. The loss of trust stung deeper than any wound. Later, Saris called Mason to her chamber. The walls glowed with the faintest silver light, the crystal softened by dusk. She stood at the window, looking out at the restless stars, her silhouette sharp against the void. Mason entered quietly, closing the door behind him. He knew better than to offer easy comfort. He simply stood at her side, waiting. Saris's voice, when it came, was low and raw. Varric confessed, he sold us for credits. It was all so small. I thought I knew my crew. Mason hesitated, then spoke, his words gentle. You can do everything right and still be betrayed. Trust is a risk, but it's the only way to lead. She turned, searching his face for anger, judgment, anything. What she saw instead was understanding, and something more vulnerable. Why do you care so much? She asked, her voice trembling on the edge of accusation and hope. Mason exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Because I've made mistakes too. Because I haven't told you everything. Saris stiffened, the mask slipping back into place. What do you mean? Mason met her gaze squarely. My capture, coming aboard your flagship, it wasn't by chance. I let myself be taken. Shock flickered across her features. You deceived me. He nodded, pain and apology mingling in his expression. My mission was real. I needed to get close enough to warn you. There's something coming, Saris. Something worse than the Corsairs, the Star Eaters. They're already on the edge of this galaxy. If we don't stand together, everything, your people, mine, will be consumed. Saris stepped back, her breath catching. All this time, you used me? Mason shook his head, stepping closer, urgency in his voice. Not used. Trusted. I had to reach your command. But what I feel for you, Saris, that's real. I never expected any of this. Not you. She stared at him, anger and hurt warring with the memory of his touch, his steady support, the way he'd risked everything for her crew. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. Saris's eyes hardened, but there was a glimmer of hope too. Tell me about the Star Eaters, she demanded. Tell me everything. Mason nodded, relief and resolve in his eyes. Together, we stand a chance. He reached for her hand, and this time, she let him. In the silver glow, their alliance, and something more, was forged. Not in deception, but in the hard, necessary truth. In the flagship's secure ops center, the air was charged with urgency and the low hum of overlapping transmissions. Mason and Saris stood shoulder to shoulder at the primary console, illuminated by the crystalline glow of data streams cascading across the walls. They worked in silent synchrony, hands moving over alien and human keys alike, inputting tactical codes, rerouting comms, matching each other's pace. Their fingers brushed over the interface, a fleeting touch, deliberate and accidental all at once, sending a tremor of intimacy through the tension. Across the holoscreen, the Resistance envoy materialized. Lyra, her hair singed at the tips, her expression grim beneath the flicker of static. The Star Eaters are advancing faster than projected, she said, voice urgent. Entire systems, gone. If we can't unify the Zephyra fleet and human resistance, we're finished. Saris's eyes narrowed, jaw set. We're already coordinating patrol routes. Mason's provided new strike protocols. We can hold them off. Lyra shook her head, voice breaking. You don't understand. The Star Eaters are adapting. Their vanguard will breach the outer defenses within 2 cycles. Mason's hand stilled above the panel. He caught Saris's eye. So much passed between them in a glance. Fear, determination, the promise of standing together. He squeezed her hand under the console, a silent vow. Before another word could be spoken, alarms shrieked through the center. The deck shuddered. Red glyphs pulsed across every screen. "Corsair boarding party," an officer shouted. Sarah snapped to command mode. "Seal all access to the bridge. Mason, with me." They sprinted down the corridor, weapons drawn, passing squads of Zephyra defenders locking down bulkheads. The enemy had forced their way into the hangar, a brutal wedge of Rift Corsairs, their obsidian armor reflecting the muzzle flashes of the firefight. Mason and Saris burst into the cockpit, ducking low as plasma bolts screamed past. A Zephyra pilot lay pinned behind a collapsed stanchion, bleeding and terrified. Saris covered Mason as he vaulted over debris, dragging the wounded comrade back beneath the battered control console. "Hold on!" Mason barked, patching a field bandage as Corsair fire chewed the bulkhead inches away. Saris unleashed a volley of suppressing fire, her precision ruthless. Mason improvised, triggering a cascade in the hangar's gravity coils, sending the Corsairs staggering as gravity flickered and failed. He hauled the pilot out of the kill zone, rolling behind a maintenance pod just as the last Corsair fell to Saris's shot. The silence was thunderous. Mason exchanged a look with Saris, sweat and adrenaline shining on both their faces. In that instant, her trust in him was absolute. No room for doubt, only partnership. Back aboard, battered but victorious, Mason and Saris faced the aftermath. Debriefing stretched into the night, revealing the full extent of the Corsair infiltration. The fleet's officers were weary, faces drawn by the strain of betrayal and loss. Saris bore it all with stoic grace, but Mason saw the cracks forming beneath her composure. The burden of command pressed down on her like a physical weight. As dusk deepened beyond the crystal hull, Saris summoned Mason to her quarters. The summons was formal, but her posture as he entered was anything but. She stood by the viewport, armor set aside, her hair loose and shimmering in the soft light. Her eyes, usually so sharp, were clouded with doubt. She gestured to a low table scattered with tactical hollows. "We need to finalize the counterattack plan," she said, but her voice faltered. Mason approached, taking in the tension in her shoulders, the exhaustion that finally showed in her face. They sat close, too aware of each other, strategy dissolving into silence. The room seemed to shrink, the world outside growing impossibly distant. Saris spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I want anymore." Mason reached out, covering her hand with his. His touch was gentle, grounding. "Maybe you want to let go, just for tonight." For a moment she resisted. The weight of duty, the memory of betrayal, the threat of extinction all swirling within her. But Mason's presence was steady, patient. Slowly she let her guard fall. The ice in her eyes melted as she leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, his arms closing around her. They found solace in each other, a fragile peace born not of escape, but of trust. Mason guided her with reverence, his hands memorizing the constellations of scars on her skin, her breath warming his neck. She let herself be vulnerable, allowing him to see the pain she hid from everyone else. Their night unfolded in quiet tenderness. A touch, a kiss, the slow surrender of two warriors who needed just once to be more than symbols of strength. In each other, they found not only comfort, but the courage to hope again. Later, tangled together beneath a spill of starlight, they mapped out the counterattack. Voices low, hearts open. "We flank from the dark side of the asteroid field," Mason said, tracing lines on her bare shoulder. "Split their formation, force them into a bottleneck." Saris nodded, her hand resting over his heart. "We'll have only one chance. If we lose the element of surprise—" "We won't," Mason promised. "Not with you at my side." A chime sounded, shattering the intimacy. Fleet Master Raylox's voice boomed over the comm. General Saris Mason, report to Ops immediately. There's been another breach. Saris dressed quickly, pulling her hair back, every movement sharp with new resolve. Mason donned his uniform, the softness of their knight hidden beneath layers of armor and command. In the Ops center, Ralox's face was pale beneath his gold stripes. He turned to Ceres, voice raw. It's Captain Valen, my own protege. He's the second traitor. The revelation hit like a blow. For a heartbeat, Ceres looked to Mason, strength and vulnerability warring in her gaze. Mason took her hand, squeezing gently. The betrayal ran deeper than either had feared, but side by side, Mason and Ceres stood ready. Together, they devised a new strategy, one born of pain, trust, and the knowledge that in each other they could endure anything. The Star Eater Armada arrived as a living eclipse, their colossal vessels blotting out the stars and swallowing the void in impossible shadow. Each ship was a writhing leviathan, organic hulls fused with ancient alloys, their surfaces rippling with alien light. The Zephyra flagship trembled beneath the sheer presence of the enemy, its bridge a storm of alarms and frantic voices. Mason stood at the central console, his shoulders squared, every sense sharpened to the breaking point. At his side, Ceres radiated calm determination, her new insignia gleaming on midnight blue armor. They commanded as equals now, eyes scanning the flood of tactical data that poured across the displays. The Allied fleet, Zephyra, Human, and a scatter of resistance craft, hung in formation, outnumbered and outgunned, but resolved. The bridge shimmered with tension as the first Star Eater salvos lit up the darkness. Shields flared and buckled, entire squadrons vanished in streaks of fire. Signal coming from the core vessel, Ceres reported, voice taut. They're targeting our command ships, trying to break our cohesion. Mason's mind raced. He saw the pattern in the chaos, the way the Star Eaters funneled their prey, always pressing toward panic and collapse. He leaned in, voice steady despite the storm. Order a feigned retreat, pull the center back, make it look like we're routing. Ceres's eyes flickered with understanding. She relayed the orders, her command carrying across the fleet. All wings, fall back to Sector 12, hold fire until my mark. The Zephyra and Human vessels spun away, trailing burning wreckage. The Star Eaters surged forward, pursuing the apparent route. Mason's plan took shape. He saw the opening, razor thin in the enemy's shifting mass. On my signal, Mason said, glancing at Ceres. Now. The fleet wheeled in perfect synchrony, unleashing a devastating barrage at point-blank range. Energy lances and plasma shells tore into the Star Eater's flanks, shattering carapace and sinew. The void lit up with explosions, fragments of living metal tumbling through the black. But the enemy adapted. Wounded vessels reknit themselves, learning and evolving with every blow. The front line bent, then threatened to break. They're closing the gap, Ceres warned, her hand flying over the controls. Mason's jaw set. We have to hit the core vessel. It's the collective mind. Take it out, the rest will fall into chaos. Ceres met his gaze, her hand finding his arm. The touch was a silent promise, a vow of faith. I trust you. Take us in. The flagship plunged into the heart of the maelstrom, shields flickering, hull creaking under enemy fire. Allied ships rallied in their wake, following Mason and Ceres into the jaws of annihilation. Through a wall of enemy flesh and fire, Mason guided the ship, weaving through tentacles of energy and bone, every move desperate and precise. The core vessel loomed ahead, a monstrous sphere pulsing with violet light. Mason's hands danced over the controls. Ready torpedoes! Target the neural nodes. Ceres's voice rang out clear and unafraid. All batteries, fire! The flagship's arsenal unleashed, blazing a path through the Star Eater mass. The core vessel writhed, its surface fracturing under the onslaught. Mason launched the final volley himself, punching through to the heart of the enemy. For a breathless instant, the universe went still. Then the Star Eater collective shattered. The armada convulsed, each ship writhing in agony before turning away, retreating in wild, disjointed flight. The darkness lifted. What remained of the Allied fleet floated battered but unbroken amid drifting debris. On the bridge, silence reigned. Mason exhaled, slumping against the console. Saris pressed her forehead to his, eyes shining with exhausted triumph. "We did it," she whispered. "Not alone," Mason replied, reaching for her hand. Weeks passed in a blur of rebuilding and remembrance. The Zephyra and humans gathered amid the ruins of old enmities to formalize their new alliance. On a dais wreathed in silver and gold banners, Saris stood as the new Grand Commander, her scars and triumphs plain for all to see. But when the applause faded, she refused the offer of sole authority. "I will not lead alone," she declared, her voice echoing through the hall. "Mason will serve as my equal, my chief strategist. We command together." The alliance was sealed with signatures and solemn oaths. The past would not be forgotten, but neither would it divide them again. That evening, in her private chamber, Saris found Mason watching the stars, his profile limned in the gentle glow of Zephyra night. She crossed to him, her heart pounding with more than the weight of command. "Mason," she said softly, "do you regret the deception? Coming to us in chains? Hiding your true mission?" He didn't look away. "I regret the lies, but not the path that brought us here." He reached into his pocket, producing a small pendant, a fusion of Zephyra crystal and human steel, intricately twined. He placed it in her hand, his fingers warm against her palm. "I want us to choose each other, Saris. Not as leaders, not as symbols, but as partners." Saris's breath caught. She turned the pendant over, feeling the unity in its weight, the promise in its gleam. "You made this?" "With Tyra's help. It's a piece of your world and mine. A symbol of what we've built. Together." She bowed her head, letting him fasten the chain around her neck. The metal was cool against her skin, but the meaning was fire. Mason hesitated, then spoke quietly. "There's more. The Human Council offered me an admiralty. They want me to lead the new United Fleet." Saris smiled, an expression soft and fierce. "Admiral Mason, but we lead together. No more secrets." He pulled her close, their foreheads touching, her laughter a balm against the scars of war. In each other, they had found not only love, but a future shaped by trust and shared purpose. Their story became legend, how a captive became a comrade, how love and courage united two worlds. On the highest balconies, children pointed to the pendant at Saris's throat, its fusion of light catching the starlight, a symbol of equality, devotion, and a future forged side by side. That's the end of the story. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and write in the comments what you liked most about this story. Our team will be very grateful to you. You can find even more fascinating stories on our channel. See you in the next video.